Tell me, what does this remind you of?
Girls.
What does this remind you of?
Girls.
What does this remind you of?
Girls.
You are obsessed with girls!
Hey, you're the one showing me all the sexy pictures.
Her name is Noel. I have a dream about her. She rings my bell.
Hey everyone. So this video is kind of hugely significant for the channel. Something I've been, I might have been promising and teasing people with for years. And now, this being probably the last video before I move away, take a break for a little while. I find it very fitting where things worked out where I can finally give you guys a Vagabond review. Now, of course, while I mostly do reviews for completed series, I do make some exceptions. In the case like Vagabond, where it has been on hiatus for many years, and we honestly don't know if we'll ever see a conclusion. I did the same thing with Hunter x Hunter and recently Berserk, although of course Berserk's situation is a bit different. So yeah, let's fucking get into it. Vagabond is a historical action series that was written and illustrated by Takehito Inoue from 1998 to technically present, and it was serialized in the weekly magazine Morning. Yes, I said weekly. That will be significant later. Vagabond is a loose adaptation of Eiji Yoshikawa's novel Musashi. This was a serial novel published in Japan in the 1930s, and it tells a fictionalized telling of the life of the famous samurai Miyamoto Musashi. From humble beginnings when he began his life as a vagabond, a wandering swordsman, all the way to his famed duel with Sasaki Kojiro. Now, I did listen to the entire novel before reading Vagabond, because I did, want the full context, and I was really interested to see how Inoue went about tackling an adaptation. The audiobook was 53 hours. It was a big boy, that's for sure. And while I will be referencing the novel several times throughout this video, we're mainly going to be focused on the manga. Vagabond takes place in 17th century Japan and follows Takezo. Takezo is a bit of a hooligan. He likes swinging his sword around a lot, challenging people to duels. He's become very, very strong for a kid. And because of this, most of his home village kind of fucking hates him. So in order to make a better name for himself, he fucks off to war with his best friend from town, Matachi, and the story picks up with them at the tail end of the Battle of Sekigahara, a great big decisive bloody battle that many people died in, but miraculously Takezo and Matahachi did make it out. However, some lustful circumstances result in Takezo being the only one to return back to his home village. And while seeing the kid that everyone fucking hates return back to town without Matahachi, well, it causes some problems. Matahachi's mother, Osugi, is, how do I put this lightly? A fucking psychopath. So she basically gets the whole town to start a manhunt for Takezo, they capture him, and then they plan to execute him. Thankfully though, the wise Buddhist monk Takuan is here to save the day. He looks at Takezo, he's like, listen man, I get it, you were kind of dealt a bad card here. You probably don't deserve to be hated so much by the village, so here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna set you free, we're gonna change your name to Miyamoto Musashi. You're gonna go off, follow your dream, practice the way of sword, challenge opponents, become a respectable samurai, and maybe one day you'll get to cuck Matahachi, because fuck that dude. Otsu here, Matahachi's fiance, is really more in love with you than him. And the now newly named Musashi is like, okay, come on, you're trying to tempt me with pussy? Nah, man. So he goes off, travels around, starts visiting dojos, challenging powerful people, and yeah, that's essentially Vagabond.
And her boyfriend's a dick, and he brings a gun.
Of course, there are many other sides to this story. Matahachi is off doing his own thing. Yeah, love that scamp. And of course, as Musashi is traveling around, building up his reputation, word starts to spread of another samurai. One who is mute and deaf, but is apparently a fucking monster. What's the deal with that guy? Will Musashi ever cross paths with him? I don't fucking know. Welcome to the world of Vagabond. Now, on the surface level, this story really doesn't seem all that complicated, and it's really not. It is divided into several arcs. It usually just involves Musashi seeking seeking out stronger opponents, whether to fight them or just learn from them. It is a man very interested in the way of the sword, and he wants to master it in his own way. Not by following a master or a teacher, joining a dojo, but just from experience fighting people. He wants to learn all about what these people do, what types of weapons they use. Problem though is that, when you're going around beating a bunch of powerful people, sometimes killing them, it does lead to, a few blood feuds, just a few. Also, remember Matachi's mother I talked about? Yeah, she's like fucking hunting him down. She's like an 80-year-old lady. And she's also hellbent on destroying Musashi for taking her son away from him, even though he didn't really do that. He just wants to swing a stick, man. That's all he wants to do, and everyone fucking hates him for it. It's wild. But of course, there is much more to the story than that. This is really a character-focused drama. Essentially the story of this man, just finding out who he wants to be in life. And it is, not surprisingly, fucking amazing. And I think the streamlined narrative works so well because there really isn't much bullshit you gotta go through to get to the really great character moments. The entire focus of an arc might just be Musashi preparing for a battle, so the series can spend its time with him, having conversations with other swordsmen, with him training, with him meeting other characters. He oftentimes questions, am I doing what's right? Is this what I want to be doing? And it's all really fantastic stuff. We also have several subplots going on the side. Of course, stuff with Matachi and the aforementioned Sasuke Kojiro. Things that are being built up, they oftentimes cross paths, which are really, really interesting to see. We also get a lot of lookbacks into the past, previous things that happened with some of these characters that show off some of the best storytelling in the series. 17th century Japan is just a very, very brutal time, and it makes for some very interesting and creative opportunities for storytelling. With my favorite parts involving the backstory of Sasuke Kojiro, where you have this kid who is deaf, which is such an interesting trait for a samurai. Kojiro was not deaf in real life, so this is a completely new addition to the manga, but seeing how a man raises Kojiro during this really tough period of time to live in was super, super wonderful. And there was another arc later in the series that involves a farm. All I'm gonna say on that, but holy fuck. Not only was it one of the best parts of the series, but it was also extremely brutal and really shows the struggle that the people of this time period had to go through. And while the series doesn't have an ending, and it may never have an ending, it literally just cuts off, mid-arc, I do think that most of these arcs on their own were really phenomenal. They had great, satisfying conclusions. And even if we never may see the culmination of all of these different subplots and how they all come together in the end, I do think the journey was still absolutely worth it. And Inoue's skill as a writer is really shown off in the parts of this story that aren't like the book at all. You see, Vagabond follows the book to an extent. Like, the general outline of major events is the same, but oftentimes the circumstances surrounding them are completely different. Stuff like the arc I mentioned involving Kojiro, absolutely 100% original, and these original parts are some of the best parts of the series, which really show that Inoue really cared about this source material, but didn't want Vagabond to just be Musashi. He wanted it to be his own thing, and I think when it came to telling this story in a different way, he succeeded expertly. There were like a couple things I preferred more about the story in the novel, but overall I do think that the manga was a better story. And the reason for that, of course, being the characters. Musashi is about as good as a protagonist as you could ever want. I mean, the guy has it all. He's super interesting and likable, but he is also very flawed. He oftentimes questions, what the fuck am I doing, man? Am I really gonna be doing this my whole life? All I'm doing is just leaving a trail of blood. There's all these people that hate me, but I also want to get stronger. I want to track down all of the strongest people in the land and challenge them. He's such a fascinating character. And these moments of quiet reflection with him make up some of the best parts of the series, where he's just, wandering around in the woods, cutting bamboo and shit. It sounds like it should be boring, but the characters are just so interesting that you really can't get enough of them. Now, unlike Musashi, Matachi is extremely unlikable. from the very start of the series when he chooses pussy over, helping his best friend survive. However, following him for a good portion of this story does work really well, just showing how different people's lives can be if they choose a different path that was set out for them. I mean, Matachi, he could have had it all. He had a fiance waiting for him, he was well respected in his village, but he did foolishly choose to throw it all away, and then when he finally regrets it, he's like, fuck, what do I do? And the things that he ends up doing might end up being worse than the choices he already did make. But that's what really makes him an interesting character to follow, to see, hey, is this guy ever going to figure his shit out? And then, of course, you have his mother, Osugi. Holy fuck. Osugi is like the most unlikable manga character ever written. She is so fucking arrogant. Oh my god. She's like, this fucker Takezo stole my son away from me, stole his fiance, that whore Otsu, away from him. I will fucking hunt down and murder this person, and I will not return to the village until I do. Jesus Christ, lady. Yeah, I don't like her. I don't like her at all. She's a very, very annoying character to follow, but what makes it tolerable is, I guess, the people who usually surround her. Most people know she's crazy, and know she'll probably never complete her goal of killing Musashi. But, she's just an old lady, let her be, whatever. Matachi, while he's made several mistakes, he still does love his mother. And I mean, she is pretty hot, every good manga has a good waifu, and yeah. There you go. I don't want to glance over Otsu. She does play a very pivotal role in the series. She of course originally wants to travel with Musashi because she's in love with him, but Musashi doesn't want her to be burdened with him. He knows that if he's going around making a bunch of enemies, life could be really, really difficult for Otsu. So she goes off and does her own thing and often crosses paths with all of her other characters. And her always being there as like a reminder for Musashi that he can go back and live a normal life if he stays with her was a really interesting aspect throughout the series and caused a lot of moral conflict within him. There are so many more characters Musashi meets along his journey. There's Jotaro and Iori, two young boys who, kind of like force Musashi into taking them on as disciples. Many of the swordsmen that Musashi meets and battles along his journey are really, really fantastic characters. Ishin, who is probably Musashi's first, super pivotal opponent. The two Yoshioka brothers were fantastic characters, two completely different mindsets and views on the world, and it was really, really interesting to see how they dealt with Musashi. Baiken, someone who's very proficient with the chain and sickle, led to one of the most creative and entertaining fights of the series. But of course, you have the big man, Sasaki Kojiro, who is essentially Vagabond's second protagonist. He gets a ton of time spent on him, way, way more than the novel, and he's so fascinating. Like I mentioned, this guy is deaf and mute, and how you go about living as a deaf mute in 17th century Japan is of course very different from how you do it in modern days. Kojiro basically grew up in a world of silence. He has a very hard time understanding what people are saying and understanding language, but the one thing that he does understand, more so than pretty much everyone else, is the way of the sword, and that's what he dedicated his life to. And when he meets Musashi, he finally forms a connection with someone else, someone who he understands because of how strong they both are. He's always followed by people who respect him, who want to help him, but Musashi is really the only person that he can call a friend, or something more than a friend. You never know.
'Cause I'm just a teenage dirtbag, baby. I'm just a teenage dirtbag, baby. Listen to Iron Maiden, baby, with me.
And yeah, his whole story running parallel to Musashi's is just so fantastic. Of course, we all know, it's a huge historical fact where those two paths lead them in the end. But like I mentioned before, it's really the journey that makes it so monumental and so well worth it. When comparing to the novel, I think that a lot of these characters are pretty similar, and when I would read a new chapter that introduces a character from the novel, I usually felt right at home. I'm like, oh my god, it's this guy, awesome. However, there are of course some major differences and liberties that Inoue takes here. I was shocked to realize that Matachi and Osugi are infinitely more unlikable in the novel. Like, holy fucking shit, the things that they do there. And of course, the biggest difference is Kojiro. Kojiro is a absolutely completely different character in the novel. He does not have nearly as much development as the Kojiro in the manga, and his whole story is probably the main reason why I would prefer and recommend the manga over the novel. Not to say that the novel was bad by any means. I mean, most of the things I said about the manga can apply there. I did thoroughly enjoy it, and it does have more details in some aspects, of course, being a novel. But when it comes to the emotional connections you make with these characters, the interesting aspects of all of their lives, I just think Inoue did a fantastic fucking job fleshing it all out. And now we get to the art, and I'm kind of at a loss for words here because we all know about Inoue's art. It's famous. He is one of the most talented mangaka to have ever lived. Right from the very first pages of the series, it's fucking incredible, and it only gets better over time. The way he draws this time period is so expressive and vibrant. You feel like you're really just plopped in the middle of 17th century Japan, and you're like, fuck, this place is awful. But there's also a beauty to it. Some of his environments are absolutely stunning. And of course, the way he draws his characters is incredible. They're so detailed, they look as if they could be real people, and they're so well drawn. They can be super expressive if they need to be, super subdued. You can tell a lot about the characters just by looking at their eyes, and that makes him such a fantastic artist. And while the series is definitely realistic and grounded, he does take some creative liberties with the art, sometimes, showing things other characters might be seeing or perceiving that really add a lot of flair to it. And as I mentioned earlier, a huge portion of this series was done on a weekly schedule. That's what makes this even more monumental. And as if it couldn't get more impressive, he uses a fucking brush pen. What the fuck? Right, like brush pens can get you an extreme amount of detail, and that's why Vagabond looks so detailed. But at the same time, it's like, this is way fucking harder to master than a normal pen. The fact that this guy does this all on paper, it's like, what the fuck? Like, I'm just really baffled at Vagabond. It looks so good. Like, by the end, I was kind of just, like, desensitized, because every fucking page is incredible. But yeah, man, good shit, I suppose. Fuck. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Vagabond. Despite it not being over, it's kind of a masterpiece. I like pretty much every aspect about this story. I think it can be super fun and exciting, dark and depressing, quiet and subdued. The themes on display are wonderful. They make you think about all aspects of life, and of course, all the way through it is just stunning to look at. I usually don't give scores to manga that aren't finished, but yeah. It's a 10, man. And now I guess the question is, will Vagabond ever finish? You see, Inoue has since returned to writing manga. However, he is mostly focused on his basketball series, Real. And with, Inoue being kind of older for a mangaka, and with how slowly he's releasing new Real chapters, I personally don't think it's likely he's ever going to come back to Vagabond. Which, of course, is disappointing. I would absolutely love to see how he finishes this story, but realistically, there is a lot of story left. Like, I'd say the manga covers about the first 3/4 of the book. Like, still a while to go if you were to continue it. And, like, this is also, like, a very famous story that a lot of people already know the ending to. He actually made this, like, whole art gallery thing, which, like, shows, like, future events and stuff. So it's not really like, we'll never know how this story ends. We all kind of have an idea how this story ends, especially if you've read the novel. So yeah, while I would like it to return, I also think, Inoue gave us something fucking amazing. If he doesn't want to come back to it, all the respect, man. I like Not even mad. It does kind of suck though that we have the 37 volumes and then 5 chapters that were never put into a volume, so we've never really had a way to own them. If you want to own Vagabond, however, well, thankfully you have a few options, but unfortunately not as many as I would like people to have. Of course you have the singles, 37 of them. They're not particularly easy to find. I believe a lot of them are out of print by now, and the singles are great, much higher quality than your normal generic single. Great big pages, really show off the art super well. But then of course the way most people have read Vagabond, the Visbig. These are really sexy 3-in-1s with some fantastic color pages. A lot of the Visbigs have shit color pages. Vagabond is an exception. Like the singles, the pages are super big, very high quality, really great to read on these, and there are 12 of them, which of course only leaves volume 37 by itself, which, you know, you'll have to get separately, but The unfortunate thing though is that Vagabond has never gotten an official digital release, which means you can't get ebooks for it, and if you were to, you know, be a dirty pirate, the scans you get look fucking terrible compared to the main series. Like, I sought out those 5 final chapters that were never put into a volume, and like, I was kind of surprised at how terrible they look. Obviously the art was still fantastic, but just the compression and the blurriness, like, I really cannot stress enough how much better Vagabond is in the physical copies. Absolutely the best way to read them by a wide margin. So yeah, there we go, Vagabond. For alternate recommendations, Vinland Saga again has a lot of similar themes. It has a arc involving a farm. Yeah. And of course, Blade of the Immortal. Despite how fantastic Vagabond was, I still think I prefer this samurai story. It's a bit more action heavy, a bit more supernatural, but it is another fantastic historical samurai story. And if you are a super big fan of Vagabond, I would also recommend checking out the novel Musashi. While of course in the end I do think I prefer the manga, the novel is no joke either. It came out in the 1930s, but it still holds up incredibly well. It's a very long novel. Of course I listened to the audiobook, but it's definitely something I would recommend fans to check out just to see the differences, because it's really interesting stuff. So with that, thank you all so much for watching. We finally did it. Holy shit. I'm gonna go move now to a new province. It's gonna take a few weeks probably. I'm hopefully gonna film some videos in advance to put out during that time. But until then, I gotta get back to JoJo, and I will see you guys later.
Got 2 tickets to Iron Maiden, baby. Come with me Friday, don't say maybe. I'm just a teen.